Alright, let's dive into this because it's a story that's got everyone talking. And honestly, it's a bit of a head-scratcher. So here's the deal. Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese made a gesture while talking about a gift of 2 melons from Japan's first female Prime Minister, Sanai Takaichi. Now, this gesture has sparked a whole political firestorm, and personally, I think it's a perfect example of how small moments can blow up into something way bigger than they need to be. What makes this really interesting is how it's not just about the gesture itself, but the layers of politics, diplomacy, and media sensationalism that have piled on top of it. First off, let's talk about the gesture. Albanese was on a podcast, and while describing the gift, he made a hand movement near his chest. The opposition called it foul-mouthed and classless, but here's where it gets tricky. The Japanese government itself has said there was no ill intention. In fact, they've downplayed the whole thing, calling out Australian media for sensationalizing it. From my perspective, this raises a deeper question. Why are we still talking about this? If the supposed victim isn't even upset, why are politicians and the media still trying to make it a thing? It feels like a classic case of political theater, where everyone's more interested in scoring points than actually addressing what matters. Now, the opposition isn't letting this go. Liberal Senator James Patterson has even asked the Australian Federal Police to investigate the leak of a confidential memo from the Japanese government. Personally, I think this is where the story takes a turn from absurd to downright concerning. The memo, which basically said Japan wasn't bothered by Albanese's remarks, was leaked to the media, and now the opposition is crying foul. But here's the irony. In 2022, Labour was up in arms when private texts from French President Emmanuel Macron were leaked. So, is it only a problem when it's your political opponents doing the leaking? One thing that immediately stands out is the hypocrisy here. It's either a breach of trust no matter who does it, or it's not. You can't have it both ways. What many people don't realize is how this whole situation is overshadowing actual issues that need attention. Housing Minister Claire O'Neil called it parlor games, and honestly, I couldn't agree more. While politicians are busy debating hand gestures and leaked memos, there are real problems like cost of living crises and domestic violence that are getting pushed to the sidelines. Social Services Minister Tanya Plibersek put it perfectly when she said, "Maybe we should focus on the big issues." It's a reminder that sometimes, these political dramas are just distractions from what really matters. Another detail I find fascinating is how this story has played out in Japan versus Australia. In Japan, it's barely a blip on the radar. Nobody in the Japanese government has publicly commented, and it seems like they've moved on. But in Australia, it's become this massive political spectacle. This raises a deeper question. Are we blowing this out of proportion because we're more interested in drama than diplomacy? What this really suggests is that sometimes our political culture thrives on outrage, even when there's no real reason for it. Barnaby Joyce, the One Nation MP, chimed in too, saying Albanese should apologize. He even went as far as to say people would riot if he had made the same gesture. Personally, I think Joyce is missing the point. This isn't about whether the gesture was appropriate or not. It's about whether we're going to let every little misstep turn into a full-blown crisis. If you take a step back and think about it, this whole situation feels like a symptom of a bigger problem. Our inability to let things go and focus on what actually matters. So where does this leave us? Albanese has refused to apologize, and honestly, I don't blame him. The Japanese government isn't upset, and the whole thing feels like a storm in a teacup. But what's really stuck with me is how this story has highlighted the disconnect between political theater and real-world issues. In my opinion, this is a wake-up call for all of us to stop getting sucked into these dramas and start demanding that our leaders focus on the things that actually impact our lives. Because at the end of the day, does a hand gesture really matter more than solving homelessness or tackling inflation? I'll leave that question for you to think about.